Make your next move with American Express Business Platinum. Earn 5 times membership rewards points on flights and prepaid hotels booked on AmexTravel.com. And with a welcome offer of 150,000 points after you spend $20,000 on purchases on the card within your first 3 months of membership, your business can soar to new heights. Terms apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/business-platinum. Amex Business Platinum. Built for business by American Express.
With the Walmart app, you can squeeze in those final days of summer and nail that back-to-school shopping list. So keep working on that tan and let Walmart Express Delivery handle the rest. Chromebooks, Clorox wipes, Sharpies, glue sticks, pens, pencils, and more. All delivered in as fast as an hour. So pour yourself another iced tea. Summer's not over. Last-minute back-to-school supplies delivered fast. The Walmart you thought you knew is now new. Subject to availability. Fees and restrictions apply.
As a contractor, I don't pay for materials I don't use. So why would I pay for stuff I don't need in my mobile plan? That's why the new MyBiz plan from Verizon Business is so perfect. Now I can choose exactly what I want, and I only pay for what I need.
Right now, with MyBiz plan, get our best price, as low as $25 a line. Visit Verizon.com/business to get started today. New lines only. Price per month with 5+ lines. Includes auto pay and paper-free billing and promotional discount. Taxes, fees, economic adjustment charge. Applicable add-ons, prices, and terms apply. Guarantee applies to base monthly rate and stated discounts only. Add-on prices additional. Offers end September 30th, 2025.
Welcome to the New Books Network.
I'm Chris Holmes, and this is Burned by Books. Here you'll find interviews with writers you already love, like Jennifer Egan and Rebecca Mackay, mixed in with up-and-coming voices like Alexandra Kleeman and Rumaan Alam. You'll find us wherever you listen to podcasts, but check out previous episodes at burnedbybooks.com and on Instagram and Twitter at Burned by Books. Let's start the show. Tatum Vega is writing a letter she never expected to write. Her longtime friend and occasional lover, Mateo Dominguez, has been accused of assault by a woman who appears to share many qualities with Tatum. Taking the form of a re-remembering of the nature of their relationship, Tatum writes to Mateo as a means of understanding what precisely passed between them when she was just a college student preparing to graduate, and he was already a famous writer, crucially important to the Latinx community to whom he gave new voice and prominence. Such is the complicated problem at the center of Ursula Villarreal-Moura's debut novel, Like Happiness. How do the years of adulthood reframe our understanding of relationships that were powerfully important in our youth? And what does the power and influence of an older man mean to that reconceptualization of a friendship? Written in a second person that draws the reader uncomfortably close to the relationship at the center of this controversy, Like Happiness refuses easy answers, even as it calls into question the ease with which our culture allows powerful men to hold sway over younger women. A novel of grace and deep thoughtfulness, Like Happiness shakes the foundation of the very idea of a campus novel, with a narrative that speaks to our moment with a necessary forcefulness. Ursula Villarreal-Moura is the author of Math for the Self-Crippling, which if you'd like to hear more about, you should absolutely check out our earlier interview in which we discuss Ursula's wonderful flash fictions. And that collection was selected by Zinzi Clemens as the Goldline Press Fiction Contest winner. And Like Happiness, a graduate of Middlebury College, she received her MFA from Sarah Lawrence College and was a Vona Voices Fellow. Her stories, essays, and reviews have appeared in numerous magazines, including Tin House, Catapult, Prairie Schooner, among many others. Her writing has been nominated for Best of the Net, Best Small Fictions, a Pushcart Prize, and longlisted for the Best American Short Stories of 2015. Like Happiness has been listed as a Best Book of the Year so far by Elle, Bookshop.org, and Libby. Welcome back to the show, Ursula.
Oh, thanks for having me, Chris.
It is wonderful to have you back on. When we talked previously, this was a novel that was coming, but not really on the horizon yet, but I knew I was going to be excited about it based on your descriptions of it. And my first question really has to do with the interaction of these two very, very different forms, flash and very short fictions, which was really something that became a specialty and an expertise of yours, and the novel, and a novel of, goodly size. I'm very interested to hear how these two vastly different forms, at least in terms of length, influenced the writing of the novel.
Yeah, so when I graduated from my MFA, I had been writing short stories, mostly short stories between 4 and I guess 25 pages. And I had a novella that was titled, I don't even know what it was titled, but it was the genesis story for Like Happiness. And at some point, I realized that I wanted to expand upon it, but I was very intimidated about the prospect of writing a novel. So I distracted myself by giving myself little writing exercises of flash fiction. And then so I ended up with a flash fiction book before I ended up with anything else. And so it's very interesting. I think that I was able to scale the adventure and the challenge that was a novel by writing the flash fictions and then kind of chipping away at a novel that I thought would overwhelm me. And ultimately, writing a novel is very overwhelming, but I felt like I had these little breaks with the flash. And so when that book came out, I thought, okay, I think, I have enough maybe muscle, writing muscle for the novel now. And so you're right. They're absolutely different styles, different, I guess. They're both fiction. So they're both in that same genre, but definitely different formats and different craft elements for sure.
Well, I really like the idea of a kind of writing muscle getting developed, and that you were writing these shorter pieces on the side to give yourself something accomplishable. I think that's probably wonderful advice for people who are overwhelmed by just the idea of the length and complexity of the novel. So I bet the audience will be happy to have that. The narrative voice of Like Happiness comes from our protagonist, Tatum Vega, and it comes to us in a second person address in the form of an extended letter and conversation with Mateo Dominguez, a prominent Puerto Rican writer with whom Tatum has an extended and complicated, to say the least, friendship. Why was it important for the novel to take this form of address? And what does it say about Tatum and her process of coming to terms with her relationship with Mateo that she wanted it to be in this sort of written address form?
So I thought that as I was writing this book, I thought I have read so many books that are so well done in third person. And for me, as a reader, I love them. But for me as a writer, I could never accomplish third person, or I would say to date, I have not accomplished third person in a way that's intimate. And I felt that this novel really was demanding that I be intimate with the reader. And I thought that the way that I could access that was to write directly to Mateo. And in turn, the reader becomes Mateo. Mm-hmm. And that was the only way that I knew to access the intimacy directly. And a lot of readers have told me it has worked. So hopefully it has. Yeah. And then one of the things that I guess is still on my to-do list is to learn third person and how to access intimacy through third person, because I'm sure it can be done. I just don't know how to do that yet. And hopefully I can write, books in for second and third as exercises.
I'm sure you will be able to, because, second voice is the hardest, I think, and you've done that so well here. And I wanted to jump on what you said about the reader becoming Mateo, because I felt like I was reminded of Mohsen Hamid's The Reluctant Fundamentalist when I was writing this, which is a wonderful second person narrative. And what that book does, which I believe Like Happiness does, is establishes a sense of some sort of complicity in the reader, some way in which the reader is entangled in a fictional wrongdoing that they then have to untangle themselves from to see where they fit in that puzzle. And I wondered if you could talk about the idea of complicity of the reader here.
Absolutely. So I think that was definitely one of my aims. This isn't a story that necessarily tells you what's right or wrong. I think this novel exists in the gray quite a bit.
Yeah.
And a lot of readers have told me like, oh, this relationship at first seems somewhat normal. And then, but I just feel kind of icky about it, but I don't know what, because nothing in particular, not one incident is necessarily super egregious. It's just accumulation of everything, right? The accumulation starts to feel different after a certain amount of pages. And so that was something I was really interested in exploring. I think that probably the majority of people have had relationships in which there is nothing necessarily that you could point to as super toxic or negative, but there is just like a film that would exist or an aftertaste with interactions. And so I wanted to make the reader uncomfortable in that way and start questioning what they considered normal and what they considered acceptable in a relationship. And I feel that, the point of view is definitely a way to have the reader brought in so much closer and start to examine, like, how would I react? Is this normal? Is this okay? Is this, is this, why do I feel this way?
Yeah, I love that. And I think you really accomplished it. And that feeling kind of discomfort is a really important part of this. And it, in a way, it separates it from, I mean, I'll loosely call this a campus novel, even though it's, the campus is not necessarily the focal point for a lot of the book, but it is a step away from the kind of ease within which one can kind of glide into a narrative of a campus novel and demands a little bit more. And even though Williams College, where Tatum is a student, is one small territory of the places inhabited by Tatum, it does feel like that moment in her life is very important, and thus gives me the ability to speak of it as a kind of campus or college novel. And it deals with relationships that grow out of a time in young people's lives when things feel very fluid and people don't feel settled. Tatum is Chicana from Texas, and she feels very much like an outsider at Williams, a majority white, highly prestigious college. Can you discuss how Tatum's outsider experiences changes the dynamic of a campus novel, especially as we've sort of understood it as a kind of like white Anglo form?
Sure. I think a lot of people have experiences in college in which, they're coming of age stories, right? We're all trying to figure out who we are at that age and what kind of friends we want and how we want to be defined. And definitely ambition plays a part in establishing our identities at that time. But I think for some people, there are some things that are just a given, right? Like where I'm going to go on vacations, with my family or with my friends during spring break. I'm not going to have a job, right? Like I have either financial support from my family or I'm on, a scholarship of some sort, or, that's just not even a question to be asked. And then for other people, I think their reality is a bit different. And for Tatum, that's certainly the case. And she has to have a job in college. And she's not going to be going away for all the vacations that her classmates are. And so I think that establishes just some sort of like a different playing field for her, for sure. And I think it's very easy for someone in that situation to feel that they're not necessarily at home, even on campus. That the dynamic around her, for sure, is very privileged, and she doesn't have access to that privilege in the same way. And so there's already this sense of unrest that's layered upon, the being young and going through some sort of maybe like, growing pains or hormonal shifts or whatever the case may be, this yearning for a self or an established self. So I feel like, all those different elements that Tatum deals with further complicate her relationship with practically everyone on campus. And therefore she's looking for someone off campus to kind of anchor her.
Yeah, and that's exactly what my next question was, which is, how do you see that kind of outsider feeling kind of driving her a little bit towards Matteo, who offers, at least in his fiction, a vision of a language and a cultural tapestry that is at least approximate to Tatum's, if not exactly.
Well, I think, the idea that there's suddenly a mirror presented to her, even if it is not, as you were saying, it's not an exact mirror, right? What she reads in Matteo's book isn't exactly her, but it's close enough to her that she's willing to reach out and to explore that. And I think that, was obviously a very powerful driving force in her life at the time. And she thought, like, something good must come out of this, right? Like, this is the closest, the most approximate version of myself that I can access right now. So pursuing this is going to be, beneficial to me in some way, or like fulfilling. And so she pursues that because at that point, I don't think she really feels that there is anything else for her on campus. She has these friendships that are, maybe not the best friendships. They offer her something, but she's definitely looking for more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there appears Matteo, and first on the pages of the book, and then in full flesh. And this gives me a good opportunity to ask if you'd be willing to read a section that happens to take place in the Strand bookstore, and that would allow us to think a little bit about some of the frictions in Matteo and Tatum's relationship.
At Starbucks, we've more than doubled parental leave for full and part-time baristas, giving them up to 18 weeks of paid time off, so they can be there for early bedtimes, late nights, first laughs, and spend more time with the best company they know. At Starbucks, benefits like parental leave are just the start. Learn more about Starbucks industry-leading benefits at starbucks.com/partners.
Who says you can't be the topic of conversation for all the right reasons? The Hyundai Tucson Hybrid pairs bold presence with advanced technology and sleek style. It's everything you didn't know you needed in an SUV and then some. Okay, Hyundai. Visit HyundaiUSA.com to learn more.
Sure. So I'm going to read from about the middle of the book. They are already friends. They're in touch. They've been hanging out in person. Tatum has graduated from college already. She's living in New York City. And like you said, Chris, they are in the Strand bookstore browsing. And here we go. So on a train ride from my work down to Union Square, you and I split a gigantic matcha bubble tea. We kept passing the plastic cup back and forth between us like best friends with brain freezes. Then I felt something else. It was your hand on my thigh, your fingertips grazing my kneecap under my skirt. Matteo, I have feelings for a woman, I said as I grabbed the tea from you. You immediately slid your hand back to your own leg, and for a few minutes you said nothing. You were hurt, but I had to get this confession off my chest. Here, take the drink, I said, to distract you from your shock. School children in uniforms shuffled off the train with juice boxes, and women in business suits filled the empty seats. What's her name? What do you like about her? You asked. Mayumi. She's teaching me Japanese. She's just... I couldn't even buy words to explain her to you. I was embarrassed yet proud to be feeling so infatuated, so full. Do you want to meet her? Do you want to introduce us, you asked? I had never thought of introducing the two of you, but now the idea held no appeal. No, I shook my head. I'm just sharing about myself. I mean, it feels exhilarating, you know? You slurped the rest of the tea in one drag and squinted at me. Your squint disarmed me. It distorted your features to the point that you looked like an unsympathetic stranger. You were judging me for gushing about a woman. Now I can see that that's what accounted for much of the tension between us on that ride. But back then, it felt like jealousy. Sure, I know the excitement that comes from meeting someone special, you said. Although our knees were practically banging against each other on the train, you seemed distant after my confession. A minute later, you shared with me that you had cheated on your girlfriend during our time at Cape Cod. I hadn't even known that you were dating anyone then. You seemed relatively remorseful about your transgression, which helped me regard you as a decent person who had made a regrettable mistake. We moseyed down to the Strand that evening. In the fiction section, when I pulled a paperback of Fried Green Tomatoes at the Whistle Shop Cafe by Fanny Flagg from the shelf, your horror was apparent. Are you seriously interested in that old Southern white lady novel? Mi vida, that's basura, you argued while attempting to take the book from my grip. Have you seen the movie? It was my fave growing up. I'm curious about the book, and I highly doubt it's basura. Don't be so damn judgy. When I told you I was getting it, you mimed blowing out your brains. What you probably didn't know was that it's a lesbian love story. You could say, I was doing research.
That was so nice. Thank you very much. And it gets me to an important question about Tatum's self-discovery in the novel, and especially her sense of herself as perhaps queer and wanting to explore and, as you say, do research on that. And this creates a kind of immediate tension and friction, perhaps jealousy, but also a sense of breaking some of the performative norms that Mateo seems to expect from Tatum. Can you talk a little bit about that friction, the expectations, and the way in which Tatum performs and then refuses to perform?
I think for a lot of people, and this is, I should add, this is a historical novel. So it takes place in the late 90s, happens to be 2000. And then I think by the time the scene that I read was about 2001. So at that time, there wasn't as much discussion as there is now about queerness, about sexuality. I know that I'm roughly the age of Tatum, and I remember growing up, the conversations that people had were more about androgyny, right? Or these terms where I didn't ever hear the word like genderqueer or gender fluid. Maybe they existed in textbooks that were just not available to me or to people like Tatum in Texas in the 90s. So she doesn't really have the language to express what she's feeling or any sort of identity beyond just a sheer attraction. And so I think that growing up, people at this time, or at least people like Tatum, there was this expectation that, success is you find someone and establish some sort of hetero relationship, and you take it a step further, maybe get engaged, get married, and then, start a family. And that was the expectation that Tatum was living up to, whether she knew it or not. She was just performing what was expected of her. And then lo and behold, she finds maybe that prescription doesn't really fit who she is. It's somewhat of a disturbance to Mateo, though, to find out, this person who I thought was adoring me might not actually even be super attracted to me physically.
Mm-hmm. So the present chapters of the novel find Tatum in her 30s living in Chile, where she is pursued by a reporter who claims to have evidence of Mateo's abuse of a different young woman who shares an eerily similar story to the one that we hear about Tatum and Mateo. Tatum is then forced to reconsider what the friendship she had at one point idealized really meant. The question of whether or not the power differential between a famous writer and an undergraduate student was itself a kind of abuse, this is a very tricky area to probe. I wonder what drew you to this particular gray area to take on, but also, do you feel like the novel is a form that can better contend with some of these types of gray area, deep complexities around power and sex?
Absolutely. I think the novel is for me the genre to explore these things. I think that a lot of truth can come out in a novel that sometimes I can't access in nonfiction, or that feels pedantic in nonfiction, or some sort of like preachy sort of lecture or, point of view. But I think that once characters are just behaving as themselves, I think that there's a awareness or truth that comes out that's really illuminating. And so I definitely felt that this was the form to do it in. I felt that she's trying to live a life that she thinks is going to be, as the title suggests, full of happiness. And she has to figure it out. And for her, that actually ends up being really messy.
I feel like there are a number of pregnant analogous situations to the drama at the center of this book, some of which I, could think of in a very direct way. And I wonder how, as you think of, those writers who fall within that same power differential, complicity, and even harassment label, how does the place of a writer who is a voice within a marginalized community make these questions of sex and power and desire and complicity even more difficult to unravel?
That's an excellent question. In the previous question, I was thinking about a novel like My Dark Vanessa.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if you've read that one.
I have, yeah.
Yeah. And I think I had actually already finished Like Happiness writing it when that book came out. And I was drawn to that book for many reasons. And it did feel, in a way, somewhat, it's definitely a campus novel. It's definitely though it is a prep school. And it definitely felt a little bit like Lolita in a sense. And I think in stories like that, it's very easy to assign blame to one party and to say, this person was completely out of line and this person was a child in the case of, My Dark Vanessa, and in the case of Lolita too. And there's sort of like, it's very clear cut. But I've always been interested, at least, for the past 15 years, in the gray. And so I wanted to write a book in which maybe the character starts out as a young person in a vulnerable position, but then becomes an adult, right? Tatum is 30 years old, a little older than 30 by the time the novel ends. So I didn't want there to be, I wanted the readers to really wrestle with the idea of blame. Who is to blame? Could it be both people? Could it be one? Could it be an uneven seesaw? And like you were saying, for a person in Mateo's position with so much power and so much fame, to be associated with someone who has no power and no voice and maybe, is still searching for direction, it is really, uncomfortable for the reader to read about them traveling the country together. But I think that, a lot of people have also said, like, well, doesn't she have a part? Like, she's not 15. She's in her 20s. At one point, does someone become responsible for their own choices? And those are the questions I was asking myself when I was writing it.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like I have heard many authors talk about this and some literary critics and theorists, that the novel is at its best when it's asking big questions rather than trying to definitively answer them. And I wonder if you feel similarly.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that some people who maybe, want everything to be tied together at the end of a novel with a bow, I think this book might unsettle them because, like I said, there's so much gray. There's so much that the reader has to answer for themselves. And not everyone is comfortable with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so true.
Are you a forward thinker? Then you need an HR and finance platform that thinks like you do. Workday is the AI platform that helps propel your organization, your workforce, and your industry into the future. Workday, moving business forever forward.
Hello, Nigel here. As an owl, I love to be awake all night, but allergy sufferers like you probably don't feel the same. So take Xyzal at night to relieve allergies while you sleep. Then wake up fully refreshed for a more productive day. Xyzal works fast and offers 24-hour continuous relief from sneezing, runny nose, itchy watery eyes, and itchy nose and throat, so you can enjoy doing the things you love all day long. Be wise all. Take Xyzal at night. Use as directed. Starts working in 45 minutes.
One of the great surprises of the novel is the way in which Japanese language and identity come into the picture through Tatum's relationships. At first, it begins with a queer, curious friendship with Mayumi, who agrees to teach Tatum Japanese even as an uncertain desire builds between them, and then in Tatum's relationship with an absurdly handsome Japanese man. We find a few Japanese characters, including for the title of the movie Spirited Away, and there are phrases dappled throughout. I feel like it does fascinating cultural work in the novel to have the idea of a monolithic Latinx cultural atlas disrupted. But I want to hear about where the Japanese came from for you and what you see it as doing in Tatum's story.
So when I was in graduate school, I took a class, graphic novel class, and I remember we read Alan Moore's,
The Watchmen.
The Watchmen, thank you. I was blanking, but yeah, I was about to say X-Men, but no, it's The Watchmen, right? And I was absolutely astonished by The Watchmen. It became one of my favorite books.
It's an extraordinary book by any measure, I think.
Absolutely, absolutely. And on the last day of class, we were all talking about, is there anything to critique in this book, or is it just perfect? And one of the things that I said was, well, this is New York City, and it's weird because most of the people are Black, they're white, and there seem to be some maybe Chinese restaurants at the very end in the art. But other than that, I don't believe it's New York City, I said.
Mm-hmm.
And that sparked a really interesting discussion in class, because some people said, no, I lived in New York, this is how it was. And then other people were like, listen, no, it wasn't. It was very diverse. It's always been very diverse. And so I knew that writing a New York City novel, I had a responsibility, I felt like, to show that it was a very diverse place. And so even though this is definitely a book that grapples with Latinx identity, it would have been unrealistic and fell flat for me as a writer if I hadn't incorporated other cultures as well. And so I attempted to do that. Of course, I wanted it to be organic, and so I couldn't have every single, neighborhood in New York represented in the book. I couldn't have every ethnicity found in New York in the book, but I wanted it to feel real and lived. And hopefully some readers, do appreciate that there are different cultures. And even within the Latinx, lens in this book, Tatum realizes that the identity that she grew up with in Texas is different than, how she perceives herself in New York. And then she moves to Chile and she realizes, that maybe she's not even the type of Latino that she thought, now that she's in a different Spanish-speaking place. So I think everything is I was trying to show how relative everything is as well.
Really nicely said, and I do think it gives a different sense of liveliness to the city. Ursula, before I let you go, I'd love to know what you've been reading and loving recently and whether you'd share a couple recommendations with my listeners.
I have been in somewhat of a reading slump, but there's plenty of books that I have read still this year that I really appreciated. One of them is called Brown Neon. They're essays by Raquel Gutierrez. It is a book that was published by Coffee House Press, I believe, maybe a year or two ago. Really interesting essays on a variety of topics about landscape art, queer culture, migration, just so many different, amazing, interesting topics. The other one is a poetry book called Rifka by Mohammed El-Kurd, a Palestinian poet. I think, it's very timely. This book came out a couple of years ago as well. I only got to it this year, but given
Will you
everything.
spell the title? Sorry.
Sure, absolutely. It's Rifqa.
Thank you.
I may be mispronouncing it since I'm assuming it's a word in Arabic. It's a really fantastic poetry collection. Somewhat of a quick read too, maybe a weekend read. And then I recently read in maybe 1.5 sittings, Pew by Catherine Lacey. Are you familiar with this book?
I'm not, no.
Yeah, so I've loved a lot of Catherine Lacey books. This one, I think, for whatever reason, and I worked at a bookstore, and I think this one came out during the pandemic, like around when lockdown was happening, so I might have missed it. I might not have shelved it. This is a really fascinating novel about It takes place in the American South. It's focused on a culture around churches and a religion and acceptance, as well as who we let into our spheres. Also has something to do with police culture. And I just find that, that's really relevant in the United States at almost any point in time.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. Well, those sound like wonderful recommendations. I haven't read any of them, and they all sound like something I should be running out and getting. But I really want to very much recommend Ursula Villarreal-Moura's Like Happiness. This is it's a shift in how we think of the campus novel. It's a wonderful second-person address novel about a young woman coming to terms with a relationship that was so meaningful to her and having to rethink it from a lot of different perspectives. And it breezes along while feeling like it's dealing with questions that rest with you for a long time. And I was already such a fan of your short fiction, but I can now say that I like this novel as much or even more than those short fictions. So I hope everyone will run out and grab a copy. Thank you so much for coming back on the show. It was such a delight to get to talk to you again.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Well, that's all for me for now. My thanks to Ursula Villarreal-Moura for coming on to talk about her novel, Like Happiness. You can find links to purchase Like Happiness and all of Ursula's recommended books at the website, burnedbybooks.com. There you'll find all of our previous episodes, links to buy a podcast t-shirt, and ways to get in contact. As you listen, take a moment to rate the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. Until next time, this has been Burned by Books.